Like, let's say in the course of, I don't know, the last month, how many people have read the book? 100, 200, 300, 1,000. There's been a good number of reviewers, right? Or readers, sorry.
Most likely, yeah.
And then there's been 1, 2 people who've complained about it. So we're talking.
Yeah, small percentage.
And if you go look at the Stormlight archives, if you look at the Bible, if you like, there's always going to be someone who complains about something, no matter how great the book is, no matter what it is. People will say, I can pick apart some of Brandon Sanderson's writing, and he's Brandon Sanderson, so no matter who you are, there will always be someone who will say, okay, there's something about this story that doesn't click with me, that doesn't resonate with me. But how many other people out there are going to be like, shit, I love this story, give me more? And so and I'm not saying to be okay with mediocrity. I am a perfectionist to the core. So I will always be killing myself to make sure that every draft is as clean as possible. Every sentence is as tight and on character as possible. But at the end of the day, it's the story at large, the characters at large that connect with people, even if one sentence, like I've ended up using certain phrases a lot more than I used to when I'm writing, and I feel like, okay, I got to find new ways to do it. But if I'm writing fast and I'm loving where the story is going and the characters just, the words are flying off onto the page, and I use that same expression, no one's going to care, because everything around it is just this engaging flow of awesome that they want to read. So in the grand scheme of things, it's just such a small percentage that actually matters.
Yeah, I totally agree. We have to be wary as authors when you get published and you get those Amazon reviews. Somebody's going to hate something about your writing. You can't please everyone, and we can't obsess on a few data points. We have to look at the overall reaction to the book. And what Andy was saying about the Bible is so appropriate, because it has like 4.4 stars on Amazon, and that was written by God. So if God's getting 1-star reviews, what can we do as mere mortals, right? But that being said, those crutch words and crutch phrases are perfectly fine. That is how you get through that quick first draft. And and it's actually an efficiency tool. She looked at him. That is something that doesn't really say much, and we might overuse it, but it's such a great crutch phrase to use as a sentence to use as a beat. So you can just get through the chapter and not at a much faster speed. What you have to learn how to do is accept that, and then be a good self-editor, so that you use tools like AutoCrit to look for repetitive words, or Scrivener, whatever tools you want to use. And then you start internalizing what those tools come back at you with. And so you recognize, okay, this is a crutch for me. I now know to look for this.
That's kind of funny, because we're doing our revision.
So use it as that tool to get through it quick, and then go back and fix.
Exactly. Exactly. I was just about to say that. Jane, who's not here tonight, she and I have been going back and forth on this last revision, and she kept calling me out on different crutch words. She's like, so snarked is one of your favorite words to use, isn't it? And I'm like, yes, I will find and I will replace at the end. Don't worry about it.
It's a great word. And I say just run with that, baby.
Oh,
but what's important, I think, that for all of us authors and anyone who's a creative to remember, is that it's kind of human nature to really pay a little bit more attention to the negative than we should. So, if I'm looking at a product that I want to buy on Amazon, a new little Bluetooth something or other for my car, and it's got 200 reviews, and most of them are great, but there's 5 bad reviews, I will click on the 5 bad to see what they say. So when you go and you look up your agents of assets and you look at it, you're not looking at, 20 good reviews. You're looking at the 1 bad review. And like everybody's been telling you, remember, it's a very small percentage, and everyone else out there, it's a small percentage. Now, if you've got 200 reviews and they are all bad reviews, that's a whole nother ball game. Yeah, we got to go back to the drawing board with that one.
Yeah.
You can use negative to create a positive. You can see what is being said. And if it's not just haters being haters, if they're actually pointing out something that can be changed, you can be aware of that through your next revision or in your next book to not do the same mistake.
Exactly.
Of course, I'd always rather have 1-star reviews get me on the petty than something that even sounds meaningful.
Yeah.
Like if something is just petty, like I hate present tense. I downloaded the free Kindle sample and I read your book and it was in present tense. I hate present tense. I hate you. 1 star, right? I wish I could give it 0 stars. And then people see that and they're like, oh, that poor author. I don't like present tense. And then you're like, oh, that's actually good, right? Because it sounds like what you were saying, Jason. It's like people are going to look at the good and the bad.
Yeah.
It's when you get that review that either finds your book's Achilles heel that you hid behind all these Band-Aids, and they just tore them off and pointed right at it and said, that's the Achilles heel of the book. And you're like, no, they got it. I thought I hid that.
Yep.
Or worse, they saw an Achilles heel that you don't agree with, actually.
Yeah.
And as authors, we're introspective. We're all too willing to say, yeah, you're right. But a lot of times, sometimes it's like, no, I don't see where you're getting that at all. But they see it and they make it sound so smart that they just everybody starts clicking helpful on it because it's a critical review that sounds reasonable. Yep. It turns out to be a killer, like the worst review you could get.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but it's interesting when that actually reveals like true weaknesses. So I've been talking about the Captain Marvel movie since it came out because I went into it hoping to love it. I enjoyed it a lot, but it wasn't for me as satisfying as Wonder Woman. Wonder Woman is probably one of the best superhero movies of the decade or however long superhero movies have been around. Right. But Captain Marvel just didn't hit on all the right notes. And I walked out of the movie. I was like, well, that was an awesome movie, but I didn't understand it. And then I read sort of a critical review or analysis, and it sort of broke down what the movie was trying to do, what they were trying to convey through the character's journey, through the antagonists, through the relationships, through all of that. And I was like, oh, I totally see how they tried to do it, but then they failed. Mm-hmm. They didn't get it quite right. So when you get those reviews, those critical reviews that are like, oh, I couldn't connect to any of the characters, then it's like, okay, so I tried to make you connect to the character, you, the reader. Now, where did I fail? And then you have this chance to look back at it, and you can actually see where you made a mistake in the book. It's too late to change it, but you can, you learn the learning curve. As an author, it starts off very, very steep. You got to learn 80% of everything, whether writing, marketing, publishing, 80% of that is going to take you a year or two. But it's that last 20% that's going to take you the rest of your life. Mm-hmm. And so it's those little tiny things, those little tiny reviews, the 3 words of the review, didn't love the character. It's like, okay, wait, why not? And then you dig a little bit deeper, and then you understand, oh, this little tiny tweak to my approach will change it. And then something else in the next book, and then the next book. And so it's always it's very helpful to improve as an author when they get those things right on the money.
I agree, but I think that kind of thing, you have to be careful because as a lot of authors, we can be insecure, right?
Oh, yes.
And so it's like with
here. Never.
It's been said. I wouldn't know.
I don't cry into my pillow every night. I don't know what you're talking about.
But if most people are saying I love the character, and a few people say I can't connect with the character, maybe it's them, the reader.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and so that's one of the reasons I don't really use beta readers, because I always feel like if it's too easy to start writing to please the beta reader and what they like, and you could have a bunch of beta readers read a book, they edit it, or they give you feedback on it, you edit it, they love it. But if you were to send it to another batch of beta readers, you probably get more criticism. It's the kind of thing you would never finish it. You can't please everybody. Yeah. You kind of have to accept that. If you please yourself as the author, I think, then and you think you've pleased your ideal reader, and if you work with a house, if you pleased your editor, which is the main thing, because the editor is supposed to be the arbiter of the reader. They're supposed to know. They're that gatekeeper, right?
I love the fact that an editor is a professional and knows their shit, right? Like they know how to make these books beautiful. But at the same time, the editor is too much of an editor often to actually really enjoy the book for what it is. As an editor, it's their job. Okay, you dropped this little inference here, and now you want to tie it back in there, and there's this, this deeper meaning that you really want to unlock, and so they get really analytical about it. Mm-hmm. And as a reader, you don't analyze things. The average reader is not going to be analytical. The average reader enjoys things with their gut, with their emotions. So I mean, I love, my editor is one of those, grammar Nazis. He's like, fix this, make this better, tie this up better, bring this out, all of that. But at the same time, I love having readers who know nothing about writing say, you know what, this chapter dragged for me. And that's all they say. And I'm like, okay, so now why was it? I needed to get a little bit of world building in here. I needed to get a little bit of character development in here. So where was it that dragged? And so you get the thing, the uneducated opinion almost. So then they're like, okay, when I was reading this, my gut told me this isn't interesting for me, or I kept putting it down, and I could, it was like, all right, I'm going to pick it back up eventually, but I didn't have it. And so, obviously you don't take everything they say as gospel truth. I've had people say, oh, I didn't like this interaction. And then I've talked to someone else, or I've run it by my editor, and he's like, no, it's exactly how it needs to be. Leave it. So like bringing in the best of both worlds, you get that gut feeling, because that's really, what people go on. And then you have the analytical, educated person, and you bring those two together. And I think that's what makes books that people love and that they keep reading.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think if you do beta reading, the ideal way to do is find someone who's, quote, an ideal reader, in Stephen King's words, someone who's representative of your target market. And if they, and listen to their feedback. But a lot of times writers go to other writers as beta readers.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
And I think that can be problematic.
Well, you do also get the benefit of where a reader might say, oh, I just didn't like this chapter, and they can't tell you why, where an author or somebody else in the industry can specify this is exactly where it went wrong and this is what you need to do. And sometimes
but you're subject to their prejudices. I want the writer's feedback after it's published. I want them to like it after it's published, not before. Yeah. I want the readers to like it both times.
Yes, absolutely. The reader is the most important.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to jump in here, guys. And I'm going to say to everyone out there, welcome to Spilling Ink Live.
10 minutes into the podcast.
we started the show without you. I'm sorry. We're having such a good conversation. And yeah, so welcome. I am I forgot to add great to my name this time. Man, it was going to be the great Jason. I'm just the Jason Lavelle tonight. And my lovely co-host, Katie, over there in Vegas. Hi, Katie.
Hello. How's everyone doing tonight?
Oh, man, we are all great. Oh, Joe has a question already. But, Joe, I haven't finished introducing everyone, man. We have two faces that you all probably know pretty well. We have Mr. Andy Peloquin. How are you doing tonight?
Oh, I'm super happy to be back.
Wonderful. Is that a little dagger on the wall behind you?
Oh, absolutely. So this is one of my current 3-weapon collection. I'm doing 1 weapon for every series that I write. So I've currently got 4 series. I'm missing 1 long sword, but I've got little dagger, badass 2-handed sword, and a spear.
Sweet.
I just got to figure out how to mount them.
I like it. And then over here on the bottom right, we have Mr. Craig DiLouie. How are you tonight, sir?
I'm awesome. Thanks.
Wonderful. And it's funny. This is the second time I've talked to Craig tonight. He was just taping the Raven with me a couple of hours ago. So we've had a great chat.
Yeah, it was a great conversation.
That was a lot of fun. So I want to read a question by Joe Compton. Let me click on it here so it pops up. We'll see what it says. Do you think an arbitrary star rating system leaves too much to interpretation and too much gray area? Or would you view a bad review differently if it didn't have stars attached to it, but was very thorough with what it had to say? Oh, great question, Joe. What do you gentlemen think?
And you want to take this one first? I'd be happy to if you.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think the star system, the problem with the star system is it's regarded as something objective because it ends up at some kind of number as an output at the end. And it becomes, and too many great books are dismissed. And frankly, some bad books are praised through a system that is arbitrary and sometimes can be gamed. And, but I'm not sure what we would want to replace it with. It's also, because it's arbitrary, one of the things I don't like about it as well, it's way too easy to give a 1-star review because something irritated you, or like I was telling you before we started, the guy who read one of my zombie books, which was back in the day, which was written in present tense, and he downloaded the Kindle sample and just hated present tense, didn't even finish the chapter, and just gave it a 1-star review. Like nobody can see that unless they drill. Otherwise, they see my overall ranking for that book, star rating for that book, go down. And so why should that factor into the perceived quality of the book? I mean, it's just doesn't seem fair. So there's a lot about the rating system that's not very fair, and that is arbitrary, and that frankly sucks. I'm just still not really sure exactly what we would replace it with. And the idea of getting rid of the stars altogether and just let people just explain what their feelings are about it is actually pretty intriguing.
Yeah. I mean, the star system is very arbitrary because some people will be like, I never leave a 5-star review unless the book blows me away. And some people are like, oh, I enjoyed it, so I'm going to leave a 5-star review. You like the 5 stars has a different meaning to everybody. But at the same time, I do think it's kind of the best system in the sense that it's simple and anyone can do it. So obviously it's nice to get those longer, more analytical, in-depth reviews, but how many people actually are going to do that? I think if there was anything more complex, we'd get a fraction of the reviews that we do. So sometimes lowest common denominator is the best way to go.
I don't know. I kind of like the simple ones. I really, readers, I really appreciate you who write several paragraphs. I think that's lovely, and I love that you take the time to do that. But really, I appreciate just something really quick. If you loved it, just tell me you loved it. If you didn't love it, just tell me you didn't love it. Maybe add why so that I can work on that. But yeah, I don't really know how else we could go about doing that. I mean, I can't think of another system that would work better than the stars, and the stars are so universal. I mean, it's almost an empirical system, that we can all relate to. 5 stars means something's great, right? I don't know. What do you think, Katie?
Yeah. Oftentimes I tend to ignore 5 and 1 stars. I tend to focus more in on like 2, 3, and 4, because you tend to get more of the realistic interpretation. If they're going to write something, it's usually bigger under those star reviews than it is on the 5 or the 1. But honestly, a lot of people they feel intimidated having to write something in a review. And so you get a lot less reviews when there is the need to leave a star and words that go with it. If you just you could leave a star, rating or leave words, I think you'd actually end up with most people going straight to the stars. And then you would just have that ambiguous star, which sometimes can be good. Because if you've got a 1-star review where somebody has literally just ripped you to shred paragraph after paragraph, that's really tough to read through. Whereas if it's just a 1-star, you kind of, whatever, it's a 1-star.
So before we get any further in this, and yeah, Joe, great question. Thank you so much. I'd really like to do a little bit more in-depth introduction for our 2 guests here tonight. Kind of just like you guys to introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about what you write and maybe what you're working on right now.
Take it away, Craig.
Craig, there you
go. My name's Craig. I've been at this since I was 10 years old. Started writing in earnest when I was in my 20s, way back when in the 90s. Suffered through trying to break through the wall, the gatekeeping system, the whole 9 yards in the 90s. In the noughties, I started to get published with small press. That was getting big at the time with using on-demand printing. That led me to, on a lark, write a zombie novel. And back then, there were very few of us doing it. And I wrote something that ended up, along with Stephen Knight, the 2 of us ended up creating a subgenre in zombie fiction, which exploded at the time, which was military versus zombies. And so that book was tooth and nail, and it sold tens of thousands of copies. And then I ended up with Permuted Press. I wrote 2 more zombie books, many, many, many more sales. And then I had a good enough story to then go to get an agent and trying to get into Big 5. And so then I was published by Gallery Books, the horror imprint of Simon & Schuster. That was a vampire novel called Suffer the Children. That was published in 2014. That did well. And then I ended up with Orbit, which is the sci-fi and fantasy imprint of Hachette, another one of the Big 5 publishers, and ended up having one of us published last year, which was a Southern Gothic dark fantasy. And then just a couple weeks ago, Our War came out from Orbit, which is a dystopian thriller about a second American Civil War. And then along the way, I started picking up self-publishing, really as an experiment, throwing spaghetti at the wall for fun to see what happened. But it ended up exploding for me and has just been doing really well. And those are World War II thriller series, little dime novels in a series. And the first one was Crash Dive, which is about a young officer in the submarines in World War II working his way up through the ranks in the Pacific.
Sounds
awesome.
pretty cool.
Hybrid author.
Yeah.
I guess I would.
Well, Andy.
All right, so I am epic fantasy, dark epic fantasy author. All of my stories, they're pretty epic and big and action-packed, but they end up going really dark. I don't know why. I try not to, but they end up going dark places. But so right now I have 4 series out: a dark fantasy, half-demon assassin, a grimdark thief girl, a young adult adventure, and now, just as of 2 weeks ago, military fantasy, like Rainbow Six style special ops company in military, like in a fantasy world with Roman Legion versus giant Vikings. And that's been so much fun to write. I'm just finishing up the 6th book now, and I am officially making the leap into sci-fi with, surprise, surprise, another assassin in the next few months. So it's been fun writing that kind of epic stuff.
That's awesome. And Anita summed it up for me perfectly. We love the dark.
That's right.
That we do.
I just love the genre title of grimdark. I think that is such a great genre title.
It is. The problem with grimdark is that or not the problem, because it's an awesome genre, but grimdark, it ends up staying dark the whole way. I find that I like using the dark so that at the end of the book or at the climax or at the real heroic moments, you can really showcase the light in these characters, whether it's just a total bastard who finally makes the right choice at the end, and because of them the battle is won or something like that, but just showing the light of within humanity, those kernels of goodness, they shine so much brighter when there's all the darkness around it. And I think that's why I end up going dark, because it makes those things all the brighter.
Oh,
I agree with you. My stuff's pretty dark too, but I like to end it on a note of hope if I can.
Yeah. Yep. And I think that's an important thing for, even if you are a grimdark fantasy or if you're a straight up horror, because I like to write horror and I like to write really, really dark thrillers. And but there really does need to be some kind of hope. You don't have to have a happy ending, but hope is an important thing for the readers, I think. Otherwise, you get done with it and you just kind of feel like shit. Nobody wants that.
Very depressive.
Yeah, you can do as many bad things as you want to your characters, but as long as there's still that glimmer of hope, there's something left to fight for. There's something left to read, continue on for.
Yep. And then hopefully you sell them on the whole series that you've created. That's the idea, right? So Andy, I actually haven't read any of your work yet. It sounds like our buddy Joshua Robertson. He likes to write epic fantasy, and they're pretty cool. Some of them are pretty dark, but I definitely have to check out some of yours. My to be read list I have to weed through it now. I actually have to weed through.
It's longer every single day.
Yes, because I love reading. I love reading books by people that I know, and so those tend to take preference over the ones that people have just recommended to me. And maybe it shouldn't be that way, but I don't know. I have so many friends that write books now. It's like, gosh, I really want to read all of your stuff. And I've read Craig's Our War just recently, and it was that was another one of those that it really just kind of shook me. It was so heavy, so intense, and I was listening to it, which for me I think is a little bit more intense, especially when you have a good producer on the audiobook, because they can really, oh my Lord. But so, over the course of a week, I listened to this book, and it's really hardcore stuff. I mean, the Second American Civil War taking place in what looks like our time, and it's so hard. I can't even really get into it, because we were just talking about it this evening, and I'm still like, I feel like I'm still in shock from this book. But again, there is a glimmer of hope, and I really appreciated that, because my heart would have just been broken into a million pieces if you hadn't given me at least something.
That reminds me of that meme that says that the dystopian shelf has been moved to current events.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, and I didn't bring it up on the Raven because the Raven's not really a talk show. I don't know. It's more of a literary podcast. But so when we're talking about all this stuff, I have friends that will occasionally send me memes on Facebook that they know I'll find particularly distasteful. And one of them was just this picture of a guy with a bunch of guns, and it was we don't care what they can say whatever they want. We've got all the guns. And I was just like, oh. And it reminded me of our war, and I couldn't get it out of my head, man, because it's a scary time to be here.
Totally. Katie, your remark about the current events, I was telling Jason, like, he was asking me what my inspiration was, and I said, well, write what you know. I mean, so I wrote a dystopian thriller because I feel like I live in a dystopia right now.
Yeah, it's a pretty scary time. And every time you look at the news, you're like, oh, God, not again. Not again. What else can go wrong? I got to the point where I had to only get my news through watching late night comedians filtering it out for me.
Right.
So depressing. I needed to laugh. Otherwise, it was just going to drag me on down.
Well, most of mine comes from memes on Facebook because I don't even care if anything's real or not anymore. Everything is just crap.
Yeah.
Oh no! Before I hit that live button, we were in the middle of a conversation, or rather, I wasn't. You guys were talking about kind of whether or not people want that perfect prose and a perfectly put together novel, or whether they just want you to get it into their hands as quickly as possible. Can we kind of rehash some of what we were talking about there? What your opinions are on that?
We should, and we should put it out to our audience too to tell us in the comments as well what they would like, faster or perfect.
I think the average reader, I think even the average author doesn't know what the word perfect really means when it comes to writing, because there really is no one way to do it. I mean, Joe was just commenting on the painting behind you, Craig. Now, if that was painted by Monet or it was painted by Van Gogh, it would be two totally different takes on the exact same image. And then if Picasso got his hands on it, well, who knows what it would look like. But
well, yeah, that's a totally different story.
But that is art. Craig and I could have the exact same character at the beginning of our stories, right? We could introduce exactly the same character, same background, same story, same supporting characters around them, same everything. And the stories that we'd tell would be so different because our worldviews are different, our perspectives are different, all of that.
Isn't that great?
Exactly. And that I think is what the average reader wants. And so as long as the story communicates these bits of ourselves, these bits of perspective and insight into humanity and the world and politics and religion, whatever else you write into it, as long as it's communicated clearly, that's what they want. Now, the perfect sentence will do that perfectly. A great sentence will do that great. A good sentence, and so on. So really what they want is to connect with you, the author. And if you use the word was in a sentence in a passive voice, it might not bother them. It'll certainly bother the shit out of whatever author is reading it. But then if the story is
or good, editor.
Exactly. So going for perfection, I would say perfection shouldn't be on the technical level. Perfection should be on the communication level, on being able to say what you're trying to say and connect with the reader perfectly. That's where perfection is for me when I write a story.
I do think, though, just to add a little bit of conflict to this, we are in a generation of hypercritical people. Whereas in the past, we didn't used to criticize the art that came to us. Today, everyone is very critical about movies, TV, books, what have you. Everyone wants to voice their opinion on what they liked or didn't like, whether or not it's a qualified opinion. They want the ability to voice it and make it heard.
I don't mind that. The only problem is it's so easy to vent personalities at home with real people than they do online a lot of times. And it's so easy to vent that they could read a book and they could read a sentence and they're like, I hate this. And then boom, 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 you get torn apart. And if you ended up having a conversation with that person, 9 times out of 10, they'd be like, oh yeah, the book was bad. It was okay. I just was having a bad day and you were there. And you can't defend yourself as the author. So that makes it a little bit tougher. But I just wanted to add that everything Andy said was, again, perfect. Part of the conversation I just want to fill our listeners in on is about the whole idea of perfect being the enemy of good for efficiency in terms of production as an author. You're really a word factory, right? And so there are certain parts of the marketplace, notably in indie publishing, where there's a lot of pressure to have books coming out all the time. It used to be like one book a month, and guys like us, I don't know about you, Andy, but like to me, as a I started in traditional, and I'm hybrid, so I'm in traditional now. But I started in traditional with no indie, and the idea of a book a month was like, oh my God, how can anybody do that? Try a book a week.
It's still
try a book a week. And so if you're going to be if you're going to be committing to being more competitive in the indie space, self-publishing, and to keep up, you have to get faster and faster. And so you have to look for efficiency wherever you can get it. And so, yeah, you're not going to be obsessing over the perfection. You're going to have a formula. You're going to pursue that formula, and you're going to do so with the maximum amount of speed and efficiency. And as long as it's good and readers like it, you'll keep doing it.
Well, I mean, sorry, go ahead, Jason.
Well, I was just going to say, as you know, for me personally, as a reader, the things that trip me up, and it's not having the perfect sentence, because I'm not an expert on sentence construction. I'm not an expert on how to lay out a paragraph for the most impact. Things that do trip me up are if there are a lot of typos or a lot of wrong words. And, I understand as an author that typos happen, wrong words happen. But those are things that if I'm in the middle of a particularly intense scene, or, a chapter that's really supposed to be meaningful, and there's, 4 or 5 typos that I keep running into, it's like stubbing your foot on something. You can just keep going, and it's not that big a deal, but it brings you right out of it. And so that's just, those are the things that pull me out. But as far as beautiful writing, I don't need, it doesn't have to be perfect. It really doesn't, and most of us will never be perfect. If you go by Stephen King's idea that all of us are, born with a certain gift level of writing or whatnot, which I don't know that I necessarily agree with. Most of us are just going to kind of be on the middle shelf, but it's being creative and crafting really cool stories that really makes a good book for me. And like Craig's newest book, I think that what had the most impact for me is that it was very, very character driven. We had great characterization, and I really felt the characters. I fell in love with some of the characters, but there's also enough plot going on that I wasn't just kind of like, getting bored with it, because I do, especially with young adult fiction. I find myself getting a little bit bored because there's a lot of times a lot of introspection going on, and I just can't relate to it anymore. So I need that plot to move me. But so that's really what makes a great book for me. Enough characterization that I actually care about those people, and then enough plot that I'm actually going somewhere,
Yeah.
I think that was the baseline of what we had discussed ahead of time, was that people will forgive imperfections as long as the story's good enough. And the driving force right now in the indie world is that right to market, that quick release. You don't take a year between books if you're writing a series. You take a month, maybe a month and a half between books if you're writing a series, because you've got to keep feeding the marketplace to keep those people's interest levels up. Problem with that, if you're a traditional writer, that first draft that you write is often just word spew. It's not perfect by any means, and it needs pretty much a heavy hand on revisions, at least one heavy-handed full revision run before it's ready to go to editing. And that takes up a lot more time than you may have if you're trying to commit to this right to market mentality.
But then also, over time, as you progress as a writer, I'm not going to claim expertise by any stretch of the imagination. I have written many, many millions of words by now, so I can say I've been writing a lot a long time. But there comes a point, it's sort of like the law of economics, the law of diminishing returns, where the level of profits or benefits gained is less than the amount of money or energy invested. And in terms of this, we're talking money is going to be equivalent to the quality of the book. And then the time invested is how much time you spend writing it. So like, let's say right now, me as an author, I can write, my last book took me 8 weeks for 220,000 words, right? It was insane how long this book came out to be. But
I could not read that many words that fast.
Yeah.
I don't understand.
Now, I will never pretend to hold myself up to the kind of standard that a lot of these traditionally published authors go through, simply because I don't know if I have that kind of talent to make the words as perfect as some of these people do. But what I can say with 100% certainty is I made the characters, and I made the story, and I made the stakes and the tension and the flow and the pacing, and like I made everything the very best that I could make it. And so if I went over it over and over and over again 2 or 3 times, how much better would it actually end up getting? I have done that before with previous books, and there have been times that it has exponentially improved. But over the last, I don't know, I guess 10 books that I've written, the improvements have been getting smaller and smaller and smaller, to the point where a massive overhaul has not been needed, simply because I guess over the course of writing so many books, you kind of learn the formulas for making, the highs and the lows, getting the character movements.
You're just getting better at it, man.
Exactly. You're always going to be able to improve. You're always improving every new book you write, but then spending so much time agonizing over it becomes less and less valuable, according to the law of diminishing returns. So there comes a point where it's like, all right, you write a kick-ass story the first time, you improve it with the second draft, you make sure your beta readers and editors make it the best thing it can be, and then that's it. You just put it out there. And it's, instead of doing it over the course of 6 months or a year, like you do with the older model or the traditional model of publishing, it's much more condensed.
Well, let me ask all you fine authors this: whatever happened to the old the authors of the movies, where they go to a mountain retreat and they write, and they come out with a book like every 2 or 3 years because they've spent so much time drinking, smoking cigarettes and writing. When did this happen, that we went from it's okay to release a book every year or two to now? I mean, we've really got to even keep our readers' attention.
Wait, let's back this up. Is like, how do you write while drinking?
Oh,
that doesn't look pretty the next morning.
I'll send you some links.
Some amazing stuff happens.
I can't do it.
Laugh the next day, and you're like, "What the hell was I thinking?"
I'll be combing the house for a stimulant. Every stimulant I get my hands on. That's how I roll. Yeah, I know I can't drink and write.
Okay, so in my case specifically, before I started writing as an author, I was a copywriter. I would write blog posts and articles and stuff like that. So I got used to sitting down and writing 10,000 words over the course of over the course of 4 or 5 hours.
Yes.
So all of a sudden, I find this subject material that I'm passionate about. I get to have people hit each other with swords. It's like, why would that not flow so much more easily than, some ridiculous article about some fancy car for sale, So for me, it's just, I can just think faster because all of my time as a copywriter. I can steam forward because of all my time as a copywriter and now my experience as an author. So the very notion of writing less than 1,000 words, 1,500 words in an hour is like, what am I going to be doing all that time just because I have been hammering away at a keyboard for almost 10 years now?
I had a similar experience. I trained my brain for it.
Exactly. It's just something that comes with time. Some people will never have that because they have trained their brains to do other things. Like so many of the most successful authors who are still, either not full-time authors or they're making the transition. Right. Like one of my friends, JT Williams, he went full-time earlier this year, but he was a paramedic. And imagine how much brain power that takes to be a paramedic. And so there's all this brain power, right? Is right now full-time author. this is where the brain is all going. So it's much easier to say, okay, I can sit down now, and for the next 6 hours, I am going to think about one thing and one thing only, this story. And so by the end of the time, I stand up and I've written 10,000, 12,000 words because of all of these factors put together. And I wouldn't say that the writing is any less quality, because it's exactly the way I would have written before. It's just been, I type faster, 100 accurate words per minute, give or take. I've learned to think faster, and I get, those neural connections happen faster. So it just, things flow more easily than they did when I first started writing. And so it's just a process.
No.
Yeah, I think there's a misperception. There are a couple of misperceptions that I want to address. And one of them actually, Andy, is something you said about Big Five publishing. Like traditional publishers, traditional authors, they're no better than indie authors. There's a stigma out there about self-publishing, that it's not good, or small press, that it's not as good. If you're getting published, and whether you're publishing yourself or someone else is publishing you, and people are reading it and they like it, then you're a success in my book. And there's nothing inherent, I think, in about one way of publishing or the other. The other thing I wanted to address was what Jason, I think you were saying, that if Stephen King did say that writers write to their potential and they stop, and it's sort of a fixed thing, I have to completely disagree with him. I do not think that writers are born. I think that there are prodigies, and people are really talented. People have very fast, great creative problem solving skills, or they have some other. They have a great communication skills. They have parts of their brain that work better, that are differently shaped than others. But anybody who can do creative problem solving can write. And the more, and I read an article in Psychology Today recently by a psychologist who was saying there's a prejudice about quality with musicians that we accept, but don't accept with authors, with writers. So if you have a kid who's adult is picking up the violin, we don't expect them to be able to play the violin. It's going to sound like a cat being killed for months until they get good at it. Whereas with a writer, we sort of expect them to, you're good or not. It's like this fixed thing. Whereas it's actually that's actually a matter of prejudice. It's like anything else. You have to get good at it, and you get good at it through practice. And I think that Malcolm Gladwell's 10,000 hour rule is actually applicable here, where they found with scanning the brains of professional writers that their brains were tuned for writing. They would narrate in their heads all the time. They could tell stories so much faster, and it was because they had so much practice at it. And they found their brains were tuned for it, similar to the way professional musicians and professional athletes, their brains are tuned for what they do.
Well, and I think that, and of course I don't have the book in front of me right now. It's probably somewhere on a shelf, but it's actually Stephen King's On Writing, which I really enjoyed. And I think that his, what he postulated was 3 tiers. There was great, good, and mediocre. And if you were born mediocre with enough training and enough focus, you could move up one level. But you can never move up to greatness unless you're born there, something like that. And it was always a little disappointing to me because I didn't agree with it. And I was like, well,
yeah,
shit, I'm not sure what does that mean for me? I don't like that at all. But we have a couple comments here.
Hang on, can I say something on that one?
You sure can.
I don't think physically me at 6'6" could ever be a ballet dancer. I'm going to put that out there, right?
Probably not.
So I will argue that there is a certain amount of truth to that strata thing. Not that you can never be great if you're not born great or good, but everybody has their limits on what they can and can't do. So when I say I may never be the greatest writer in the world, it's probably true, simply because I don't have that perfect storm of everything that goes into being the greatest writer in the world. Can I be a great writer? Maybe. Can I be a good writer? Hell yeah. Can I be a terrible writer? If I didn't practice, if I didn't work at it, I probably would be. So I do think that there will be people. It's like there's only one Einstein in a generation, right? It's everything comes together to create this excellence. that not everybody has. And that's not a bad thing. You don't have to be the best writer in the world to be a great writer or to tell stories that people love.
And that's all I've really ever wanted, was to tell stories that people would love. And yes, I definitely need that love part. Yeah, that's a big part of this process, because if I'm never going to be rich and famous, I at least need to get a little bit of affirmation. Come on, guys, come on.
Boy, every so often does wonders.
So I'm going to read a couple comments from people here real quick, and then I have another. Don't let me forget, Katie. I have a question for these guys.
Okay.
All right, from Jeffrey. Jeffrey, I don't know how to pronounce your last name. Eights. I believe one issue that authors have is that they keep going back to the same wishing well, and readers grow tired of the same old, same old. I have been coming across this a lot in books lately, especially if the series is longer than the traditional trilogy. So that's from Jeffrey. Andy, you look like...
I think people like their tropes, and that's why, I mean, look at Hollywood continually recycling the same thing, because they know it's got market value. And I think while some readers do get tired of the same tropes, a lot of readers are comfortable with the tropes they expect within a genre.
And I think that's absolutely right. And I think that it's especially true of certain genres. I read a lot of fantasy growing up, and I was so comfortable with the way fantasy novels unfurled for me that's all I wanted to read. I wanted to be in that
comforting
place.
about the familiar.
That's not to say, though, that bringing something new to the table is a bad thing. That's a wonderful thing, to be able to think outside of the box and bring something new.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. And then our friend Joshua said he used to write a lot while drinking whiskey. Doesn't drink at all anymore. You know what, Joshua? I really don't drink all that much anymore either, unless we have special guests over. But let's see here. Oh, Mike Faria. Mike, keep fighting the good battle, my friend. Mike just quit smoking about 2 weeks ago, so his brain is still having a hard time adjusting. He used to sit on the porch and think about his books with a cigarette in his mouth. Now I'm like, where's my chill pill? I don't know what.
That is so hard. That used to be the only.
A walk can accomplish the same thing, actually.
A walk could be really nice. It really can. If you put your dog on a leash and just go out into the woods for half an hour, and sometimes that does the trick. Yeah. But there was another question coming up.
You'll get those still moments, that you can dream your book.
For sure. Quiet moments to hear yourself think.
There's a strange amount of comments about green tea. I'm not sure what the hell that's going on about. Okay, more green tea, more green. All right, we're gonna skip out of the rest of those. So my question for you two who have been copywriters, is what kind of tools do you use to train your brain to write like that? And this is a question that a lot of people get. How do you write so fast? Blah blah blah. But what are some tips that you can offer, maybe as far as getting rid of distractions, or how you get yourself into the zone to do it? Or, what does it take to be that kind of person that can write 10 grand in, half a day or a day? Because that's a big deal.
I need to take this now.
Oh, yeah, Craig.
I got paid to do it. So I'd come in at 8 in the morning and leave at 5, and I had to write in between. Okay. So so I would try it, but that was great because I think Annie would say the same thing. It trains your brain to stop waiting for the monkey to jump on your back, and then you're gonna have this big flame out, and then you're gonna just put it away for a while, and then come back to it later. With copywriting, you're trained to do it every day. But these days, I'm still a copywriter. That's my other job. I'm an educator and journalist in the lighting industry, so I work for construction magazines and trade associations. And so that's always keeping me writing. But another part of it, I think for the fiction, I still have to be a self-starter on it. And it's great to have I know I have some publishing deals, so that's really helpful for me. But for my self-publishing stuff, I don't. So I have to be a true self-starter for that. But I just treat like exercise. Sometimes it takes me wild horses to get me downstairs and on my treadmill. But once I'm there, it takes me wild horses to get me off it. So I would say to anybody listening, if you need help self-starting, is give it 5 minutes and wait for the flow to come. And once that sense of flow happens, all those endorphins will be firing. You'll be high on your work, and you'll be happy, and you won't want to put it down.
Yeah.
Some truth to the statement of nothing motivates like a deadline that really spurs you on.
And nothing motivates like it's just starting it. Like just if you write a couple sentences, even if they're junk, just get it going. And you can, once you start hitting a little tiny bit of a stride, your brain will just be out of interest. If you want to do this, that's a big deal. Then you will end up doing it. You'll get right into it.
Yeah. I was going to say the same thing. Number one, have a family that you have to support. That's probably the greatest motivator.
That's a good motivator.
But then, sort of like fuck inspiration in the sense of don't wait for it.
Yes.
Make it happen. And I love what you said, Craig, because it's like that first sentence or two might be just total garbage, but then you start the rock rolling downhill. You've got your brain has been trained to make these connections, right? You've got the thread of the story that more or less. Well, at least for me, because I'm an outliner, so I know where I need to take this story. What happens to push this character forward, where they need to end up. So you've got these threads that you've been pulling on for weeks now, or days now, or months now, however long you've been writing the book or the series. So everything's already in there. You just got to pull it out, and you do that by just hammering out those words. That first sentence. Maybe great, maybe bad, come back and fix it up later, second draft, but start things, push that ball forward, introduce that, the opening scene or the scene there of the chapter, throw in the conflict. And by the time you get to the actual conflict or the character interaction, it's going to start writing itself because you know exactly what needs to happen in your subconscious or unconscious as you create this kind of thing. So don't bother waiting for inspiration. There will be those moments where it feels magical. I wrote 2,500 words in 1 hour because it was a scene between two characters that had hated each other for 2 books, and they finally get to shout their hatred at each other. And it was so much fun. But most of the time, it's like, all right, this is a scene where it doesn't feel like, oh my God, this is the greatest thing I've ever written. But then at the end of the chapter, I go back and I read it, and I think, yep, this is exactly what needed to happen.
All right.
Totally agree with that.
I feel like those are great answers. Katie, I expect your output to go up by 300% now.
Yeah.
Mine too. So now I'll be producing a book every 6 months instead of every year and a half.
One more on the trilogy that Jane and I are working on. We got one final one to do, and we have 2 potential editing deadlines for it. So yeah, it's time to just put the words on.
Nice. Yeah.
And Mike says something I can totally relate to. He says, I kind of get mad at myself sometimes because I'll sit in front of the computer for hours on end, and sometimes I'll only get a page or 2 completed. And Mike, you know what? If you've gotten a page or 2, sometimes that's more than I get. Sometimes I'll sit there for an hour and I've only got a couple sentences, and I'm like, what am I doing here? I'm obviously, my head is just, I'm not in it.
For that case, I would say that it can be really helpful to, it's like falling in love. You have to believe in it, and it has to drive you. The idea has to drive you. I mean, I write these books half the time because I just want to see them in my hand and say, okay, I see the whole thing now. It's all done. I see it. It's in my hand, and I can read it. But otherwise, when you're starting a book, it's a lot like, I liken it to climbing Mount Everest. So you're at the bottom looking up, and you're like, holy crap, I got to climb this thing. Like, I don't want to do this. And I do this for a living. I don't want to do it. Right. And so you're looking up, and then you're like, okay, well, I'm going to get my base camp. Right. So I know I can plan this out. I know where the top is. And so that's your base camp naturally is your outline, your character arcs, your main plot structure, how you're going to approach the book. And then you just start walking, and that is 1 sentence at a time. And then every once in a while you look back and you're like, hey, I came a long way. The top doesn't seem as far. Then once you reach the top, you're at your midpoint, you start going downhill. You're like, hey, this is getting easier and easier because I'm heading towards the home stretch. Everything is just coming together. And there's that beautiful part of the book. Andy, I don't know if you've found this, but like there's this part of the book in like the 3rd act or the 4th act of the book where you're like, oh my God, this is really firing on all cylinders. And God, I worked so hard to get here, and it's over because now I'm done with the book, and I got to start this all over again. Where was that beautiful moment?
Yeah.
Oh, no. And but that's what it's like to write a book. So yeah, it's really hard. So you have to fall in love. You have to say, I'm going to climb that mountain because I want to see this book in my hand. I want to do it. I want to get it done.
And on the other side of things, there is this degree of professionalism to say, I don't give a shit how I feel. I am pushing this. I am walking up this hill, like
Right.
that's something that I,
but either way, it's a matter of will.
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
a basic will to get started. But writing a page or two in an hour, or a couple hours, and you're going to have days like that. Your brain's just not going to want to do what you want it to do, and that's okay.
Yeah.
You try, and then, but just the next day after that, you get to it.
There's a program that I used to use when I really just needed to push myself. You know what I'm about to say, don't you, Jason?
Yeah, you conned me into using it.
This isn't negative consequences, is it? That one?
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
no, really?
Yeah,
Write or die.
Write or die. Yeah.
Do you know that was based on a study in the 80s? There was a study that found, there was the whole thing. You had to give money to a charity you hated. They didn't delete your work or anything because it wasn't automated. But there was an actual study where you had to donate to a charity you hated, and they found their output increased dramatically.
Yeah, sometimes you just force
So that somebody made an app out of it.
That is a very interesting idea. I would never go for that.
Although I think that positive consequences as a carrot is so much better than the stick for me. I just find I'll just, if there's a stick, I'll do it, but it won't be, my heart won't be in it. And that'll be,
for me,
it'll suffer.
Sometimes I can get lazy, and I think we all have our lazy moments. And when you hit those lazy moments, but you still have a deadline, you have to force yourself through it. And sometimes I need a shove to get going. And so I would use that to kind of just get me back in the habit of powering through and just word spewing that first draft. And then once you get back into that mindset of just word spew, then you can go back to writing normally. But that was a great tool to get me into the mode where I knew I needed to be. But for
it works for you. So.
Yeah. I found when I would struggle with the writing, it would be because I'd be second guessing myself or doubting whether the story that I was telling or the interactions that I was writing or just the sentences that I was writing were good enough. And then I'd go back and I'd read it a day or two later and I'd be like, okay, no, this is fine. It's not perfect, but it's fine. And I can tighten it up really easily. So I would say getting over that self-doubt, that anxiety that it's not good enough is probably one of the things, aside from typing faster, right? That's the best way to speed up your writing is type faster. But if you're like, okay, I've got to go back and edit that last sentence I wrote or that last paragraph, that is self-doubt because you're saying that what I did before is not as good as it could be. So now I'm going to go back and I'm going to make it better somehow. And that takes time and it slows you down. So it's this thing that I have trained my brain to just keep steaming full force ahead and keep writing forward. And I'll drop a note, fix something back up there or add something back up there. But it's just always pushing forward because you can always tighten things up later.
Katie,
there's a wonderful white paper written by a heart doctor of all people at the University of Toronto, and he wrote a white paper about writer's block as a treatable condition.
Interesting.
And he analyzed it. And now what he was doing was looking out for people in his profession who are academic writers because you have to get published to get ahead. And so, but a lot of people were afraid of it. And the number one thing he found was lack of positive feedback. So you would get a beta reader who would, wreck you in a way, wreck your confidence. And then another thing was imposter syndrome, where you just felt like you just felt deep down that you weren't good enough. And he has a whole bunch of tips for whether it was mild, severe, or chronic. And negative consequences was for chronic. But he said for mild and severe, you could imagine you were a famous writer and now you're writing. You could stop in the middle of a scene where you were on a roll so that the next day you would pick up into that scene and you would still be on a roll and then could keep rolling after that. And he had a whole bunch of tips. I'd be happy to provide a link to it if you guys want to hit me up later, if you want to add that to your show.
Sure, that'd be awesome.
It was pretty cool to read it. Yeah.
Well, Katie, listen to these two frickin' guys. I mean, writers. I mean, we've got like the poet and the engineer here. We've got to fall in love with the process.
Andy, I wish we learned each other. I would hang out with you.
You know what? Creative writing seminars at the local library. I tell new authors the same thing. Spew those words out in the first draft. Do not focus on whether or not they're good. Your first draft's going to be a hot mess. Just go with it because you can't edit what's not written. So get the story out. And once it's done, fine, go ahead and slog through the muck. But if you don't get to the end of that story, you never will. If you sit there and focus on chapter 5, endlessly trying to make it perfect, you'll never get to chapter 6.
And that's
Yeah.
something we were talking about before we started recording, and that you wanted to revisit, Jason. And it was the whole idea of how do you increase efficiency. And Katie, I was saying to you that what your approach of doing that, just writing a really fast, down and dirty, whatever, however comes out, it comes out, first draft, and then going back and taking your time with a second draft where you're really filling everything in, and then maybe the third draft, which is your refinement. But that's, I was telling you that is how I understand it. The traditional pro publishers, writers do it for traditional publishing. But it's harder and harder to do that these days. But I think that's a terrific approach, and I think that it requires a certain amount of bravery for people to write that crap first draft, right? And say, okay, now I got it down. I know what my story is, basically. Now I can really write the story. And it's so much easier to write it because I know where I'm going. I know what it is. And so anyway, I think it's a great approach that you take. I personally don't take it. I try and write a great, the perfect first draft. Not perfect, but good enough first draft. But it's just how my brain works. Well, and the way I do it is I end up, and this is a tip for going back to the whole writer's block thing. I'll always read the scene or chapter when I start writing. I'll always read the previous scene or chapter, which I think is a common thing that writers do. And then I'll polish it, and then now I'm back in the head space of the book, and then I can go move forward. But anyway,
and that's important for other authors to know, is there's no one right way to do it. You write the way it works for you.
Absolutely.
And as you decide which model of publishing you're going to go into, you may have to make some adjustments to your style, but ultimately it's got to be the way that you write. Otherwise it just won't get done.
Right.
So before we kind of wind out of time here, I want to give you guys an opportunity to talk a little bit about your latest release, and kind of tell the viewers a little bit about it. Make us want to buy your latest book. Craig, I already know all about your book, but not everybody else does. So.
I want to hear about it.
Yeah, I want the pitch. Let's hear the pitch.
Okay. The novel's called Our War. It's published by Orbit, and in just a couple of weeks ago, and it's a dystopian thriller about a second American Civil War. And it's about a UNICEF worker and a journalist who uncover the use of child soldiers in the war and their efforts to stop it. So it's very dark. It's very gritty. It takes a very what I think is a realistic approach to how such a conflict would actually happen. It would be, in my view, would be much more like the Bosnian War in the 1990s than the last American Civil War in the 1860s, where you would have city against urban against rural areas. And most of the fighting would be done between citizen militias. So it's the kind of war where everybody fights, nobody wins, and the innocent have to pay the highest price. And and also I wanted to point out that politically, it's not a wish fulfillment story. It's not a polemic for or against one side or the other. It simply takes a lot of the rhetoric that's been going on recently and a lot of the polarization, thematically, the tribalization in American politics, and takes it to a logical extreme where, okay, what if this actually did happen? What might that look like? And what would it be like to be living in America that was fracturing and that was destroying itself? And so it follows these characters, and it's pretty grim and pretty dark, and but it and very gritty. I like to think that my personal formula, whereas I write many different subgenres of speculative fiction, the Craig formula, I would call it, is to have likable, relatable, deep characters in a gritty world that feels very real, to promote willing suspension of disbelief, and then put them through the ringer. And then tie that around a big idea that thematically is titillating to the spirit as well as to the head and the gut, and then end it hopefully on a note of hope, which this book does. And so so that's Our War. It's out in all formats at bookstores everywhere, and on Amazon and other online retailers.
Look forward to the current event section.
Yeah.
Hopefully not.
And I can vouch for this book, guys. It is. I could definitely recommend it. It was fantastic, but it is very, very heavy. So make sure you've got a clear headspace to go into. But it's amazing read. Very, very.
Well, I'm glad you read it. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yes. Andy, tell us about your.
I feel so bad following this. I should have gone first because I don't know. His stuff sounds so intellectual.
Let's redo it.
And thoughtful, and mine's like I hit stuff with swords. No, so the Silent Champions is basically everything that I love about SEAL Team, Rainbow Six, Black Ops, and I drop it in a fantasy world. So it's this 7-soldier unit. The officer, the captain's the main character. There is a rifleman who's a soldier, heavy gunner, which is fantasy, so he's got a giant axe. Demolitions is an alchemist. Then there's the medic, the sniper, an archer, and a scout. So it's the 7-man unit. They operate like any special ops team in the sense that they are part of the military but independent of it. And they basically take on impossible missions. They've got to kill, they've got to find a way to save the army from an enemy that's 2 or 3 times their number, or it's the 7 of them against 2,000 of the giant Viking like barbarians that are raiding their land. That's the word that I meant to say. And so basically it's like every great military thriller and every great military series that you've ever loved, but it's fantasy, and it's this fascinating insight into these characters. And it is so much fun to dive into these personalities because each one of them is so unique in who they are. You get to see this insight into what makes people the elite soldiers that they are, and yet how they're still so human despite it. So I would say that the story itself is very much just an action adventure, classic military kick-ass fun, but it's this fascinating character study about these people.
Andy, can I ask you a question? What would you consider to be the Andy formula? Like, what do you think someone could find as a signature in every one of your books that would be something that you either rarely or even uniquely bring to your genre?
Every character is damaged. Like, everybody is damaged, and that damage, I like to make the damage, number one, something that they succeed in spite of and because of. So it's, whether it's the character that has been, okay, let's say I wrote a disabled character, right? And the disabled character goes through all kinds of terrible shit. And yet because of their disability, they succeed. Or one of the characters in my world has his tongue cut out because it's part of the secret order of priests. And because of that, his comrades have to learn sign language to communicate with him. And this sign language is exactly what makes their team so effective, because they can talk in the middle of battle or when sneaking up on the enemy without a word. And so that's my approach to, definitely there's plenty of that. But yeah, I think I really like showing how even the greatest people are damaged, and the damage is something that's part of them. They succeed because of it and despite it.
That's awesome.
And I remember, I had told you I read a lot of fantasy growing up, and one of the guys that I read a lot was actually Piers Anthony, and he wrote the Xanth series that was super duper long, and he did. He always had characters, and they weren't deep sounding like your sound. They were really just fantasy characters, but he had a way of taking the guy who couldn't do any magic or who couldn't speak, and somehow that comes into play later and is a plus, is a good thing. And I always liked that, and so I came to expect it. I'm like, how is this character going to use this to do this? And I think that's really fun for readers, especially if they know that that's your style. I think that's a really cool thing. So. And
I think it counteracts a lot. I mean, at least for me, when I read a book, that's what I look for. And I've heard a lot of people say, "Man, your books, I would read them over, traditionally published books," because it's like Craig was saying, there's this reputation that indie books are somehow lacking. And so for me, my drive to write a great book, I'm not going to write these worlds as complex and epic in scope as some of these authors out there. I mean, like you look at the Stormlight Archives world, or the world of some of these authors who put out these amazing things. I don't think I have the brain power for that, but what I can do is make a character that you will connect with and you will absolutely relate to on this deep emotional level, and really exploring who they are. I mean, the first character I wrote was a half demon assassin with a cursed dagger that has a voice in his head that drives him to kill, right? All bad guy traits, and yet it was this thing where you actually understand what's going on in his mind, and it just became this character study that people totally found bits of themselves. He's an outcast, a loner. We all get that. He's different from everybody around him. So just finding these things that make anybody, literally anybody, no matter how, where they are on the good to evil spectrum, relatable and something they can connect with. That, I would say, is, I guess, the Andy Peloquin touch.
I like it.
Well, you have great characters. You've got 75% of a great book.
Absolutely.
And the rest just follows, is what I'm saying. That's most of it right there. Just having a character that the reader can relate to. Totally.
Yeah, definitely.
That's great.
And I'd rather read a book that I really enjoy the characters than that has some huge, vast universe behind it. Yeah, I mean, if you put the two together, then more power to you. But yeah, great characters are really what sells for sure. Well, we are kind of. You want to come up? Flapping her wings at me. We are kind of getting to the end of our time. This is Jazzy. I call her Buzzard though because she's a plucker, so she has a lot of missing feathers here. She's super anxious.
How's the kitty getting along with them?
Just fine. I think the cat really doesn't notice them too much. We have a kitten upstairs though that is really enamored with him. She would really like to hang out with the birds, but the birds would hurt that kitten for sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, so we're at the end of our hour. We kind of went a little over tonight, Katie.
It's a great show. I mean, the conversation has kept going without even the slightest hint of an awkward pause.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it just flew by for me. That was fantastic. Thanks a lot, Andy. It was really great meeting you, man. I hope you're keeping fun. Good luck.
I'm so glad that I sounded coherent next to you.
You sound more than that, man.
Good.
You guys were
have to get you guys
and
back
thank
on
you.
the show again. This
Katie
has been
and
a
Jason.
great,
It's always great talking to you guys.
Yeah. Well, you guys were both wonderful. And for everyone out there watching or listening, thank you so much for joining us. And we'll see you next Saturday. Yeah.